My parents love to play canasta. Any canasta players in here? Yeah. And they had some friends that they would play canasta with, and they'd get together. And so naturally, our two families spent a lot of time together. And they had a son that was 5 years younger than me, but we still hung out just because we were in proximity, a lot. Late into the nights, so those canasta games would go long. And we became friends. And one of the things that we would do is I had one pair of boxing gloves, and we would go out on the trampoline and box each other. Well, there was only one pair, and so one person got the right-handed glove and one person got the left-handed glove. And since I was older, I went ahead and I took the right-handed glove. Of course, he complained about that, but I was older, and so I took it, and we were jumping around on the trampoline and trying to, it was half playing around, half messing around, but there was a half of it where we were trying to actually box, kind of thing. And, being older, I put him down. I boxed him down pretty hard, and I let him know, hey, I'm the champ here, and so I let him down. Well, it was fine until his mom found out. And she did not need a pair of boxing gloves to deal with me, right? She was quite upset about that. I remember the story where Taylor told a few weeks ago where he and his very strong friend, Pat, were doing the same thing. One pair of gloves, except Pat, because he was a nice guy, he gave Taylor the right-handed glove, and they were boxing in their house or somewhere, and Taylor was trying to get in a shot, but in the furiousness of it all, he punched him accidentally with the ungloved hand. And Pat said, "You just hit me with your bare hand." And that's the last thing Taylor remembers. It ended with the punch from Pat. Now, you may have heard the phrase, we say it in football a lot, everybody has a plan until they what? Get punched in the mouth, right? And that's true, but life is that way, isn't it? We all have a plan until life punches us in the mouth. I mean, whether it comes from, maybe you guys had, a harsh parent growing up, or maybe now it's like failing health. I know a little bit about that. This last week, I was in the hospital twice, and it was a real low point in my life and in my marriage whenever my wife is looking at me and I'm on the hospital floor puking and trying to keep other things together. It was a real low point in my life. But when life knocks you down, maybe some of you guys know what it is to be hit financially. And those of you guys that take care of your finances in your family, you know what it is to not be able to fall asleep at night because you're just worrying and wondering, how is this going to work out? And you're nervous about it. We all know what it's like to get knocked down in life. I mean, life is hard. It's really hard. But as a Christian, these things come a little easier and harder at the same time. Do you understand what I mean by that? I mean, as a Christian, it should be a little bit easier, right? I mean, Psalm 27 is a psalm that I've been meditating on lately. And Psalm 27, verse 1 says, "The Lord is my light and my salvation." And he says, "Whom shall I fear? Who shall I fear? The Lord is my light and my salvation. The Lord is my stronghold," he says. "Of whom shall I be afraid?" He says, when the wicked come against me, he says, "My heart will not fear." He said, "Even though an army besiege me, I will not be afraid." He said, "Even though war breaks out against me, even then I will be confident." Right? So it should be easier for us as Christians because we have hope. Our hope in Jesus is that we can face tomorrow. We don't funeral like other people funeral because of our hope. And it's also, I would say, easier because of this right here, the church. You've seen that how the church takes care of their own, right? I mean, we've been guilty, sure, of not taking care of our own, but more times than not, the church takes care of their own. I've seen where people will show up and rally around people who are having a hard time, that show up to listen to people, to just sit there and be with them. I've seen where they show up and watch people's kids. I've even seen it where they show up and just to wash somebody's dishes. The church can be a beautiful thing and a help in our time of trouble. But it can be harder too. As a Christian, it can be harder. John records Jesus saying in John 16:33, he said, in this world, Jesus telling this to his disciples, and he said, in this world you will have what? Trouble. Remember that? He said, you will have trouble. And right before that, he said, if they persecuted me, they will persecute you. He said it. He was very blunt about it. Paul told his protege Timothy, he was very honest with him in 2 Timothy 3:12. He said, everyone who wants to live a godly life will be persecuted. And then Peter, in 1 Peter chapter 4, verse 12, he just says, he said, hey, don't be surprised. He said, you should not be surprised at the hardships that you're going through for the sake of Christ. Here's the point. As a Christian, hardships aren't an exception. They're the expectation. We should expect hardships. Now, we're in a series called Ripple Effect, but it goes both ways, doesn't it? Right? We make the places that we're in and the people that we're around better. But sometimes we're affected by the world, and their ripple effect affects us and makes it hard for us. Everybody goes through hard times. You've been there. I've been there. So the question is, what do you do when you get knocked down? Acts 14 tells us. So, if you're following along, we're going to be in Acts chapter 14. But before we get there, I want to go back to Acts chapter 10 because if you were here last week, you remember that Acts chapter 10 is kind of where we left off. And a lot happened between Acts chapter 10 and Acts 14. Now, you remember that Peter has a vision. In Acts chapter 10, Peter has a vision and says, hey, kill and eat. All these animals, they were unclean animals to him. And he's like, no. I've never, and God was saying to him, no, I'm allowing, it's not about animals anymore. It's about people. And I'm allowing all people into this thing called the church, Jews and Gentiles. It's a big deal. And so the very next thing that happens is some of the Jews are not going to be understanding of this. So Peter has to explain his actions, and he says, hey, guys, look, here's what happened. I got news for you. God is allowing the Gentiles to be part of this thing. And so the ripple effect begins to really expand. Now that the Gentiles are part of this, this thing starts growing like crazy. In fact, all over the Mediterranean map, this thing starts growing. And so the church in Jerusalem, they send Barnabas. They said, hey, man, this thing is getting out of control. Go see what's going on up there with the Gentiles. So Barnabas goes up there, and he sees that this thing is exploding. Well, he wants some help. He knows a guy. From back in Acts chapter 9, Saul was converted after he was persecuting the Christians, and he's like, oh my gosh, Jesus is not a fraud. He's alive. And so he has to go and deal with the fact that he's seen the scriptures all wrong. So what he does is he goes home. He goes home to Tarsus up north, and he just goes and he's re-looking at all the scriptures. Well, Barnabas, he gets up there and he says, all these Gentiles are coming to faith. And he knows that God's call on Saul's life was to be a witness to the Gentiles. So he goes on further and gets Saul, and he says, hey, come on down, be part of this. This is, tag, you're in. This is your time. So Saul and Barnabas become a dynamic duo in that moment. Well, In Acts chapter 12, things get bad for the church again. King Herod is on the throne, and he just decides, I don't know if it's out of nowhere or what, I don't know, but he just kills one of the apostles. James, the brother of John, he kills him. And the Jews applaud him for it. And when he sees that, he says, oh, okay, let me get another one. And he gets Peter, and he's going to kill Peter. But do you remember what happens? In the middle of the night, an angel shows up, busts him out of jail. Remember that story? And Peter is released. It's an incredible story. But Acts chapter 13 happens, and this is the chapter in the book of Acts that's a hinge point. This hinges the whole book for a couple reasons. Number one, Barnabas is the leader between Barnabas and Saul, right? He's the leader at the beginning of the chapter. But by the end of the chapter, now Saul is the leader. And it's not Saul anymore. He goes from Saul to Paul. This is where he changes his name. Now, most of us might think that Saul changed his name because, Saul, that just sounds evil, doesn't it? Saul, he was a bad man, and now he's good. And so now it's like, Paul, that's easier on the ears. I think I'll go to Paul. That's actually not he didn't change his name because he was bad and now he's good. He always had those two names, always. Saul was his Hebrew name, how you pronounce it in Hebrew, and Paul was his Roman name, right? But what happens in Acts chapter 13, he switches from primarily reaching the Jews to primarily reaching the Gentiles, and that's why he changes his name, was because of where his primary mission was going to go. So Paul and Barnabas go down, and they go down to a town called Pisidian Antioch. And Paul preaches a sermon down there that just goes nuts. I mean, he preaches one of them revival sermons. You remember those? And it gets everybody worked up. There's a couple lines out of that sermon that are important. In Acts chapter 13, verse 38, he said, "Therefore, my friends, I want you to know that through," what's he say there? "Through Jesus, the forgiveness of sins has proclaimed to you." Maybe that doesn't mean too much to us, but to them it was a big deal. Because how did they receive forgiveness of sins? They had to bring a lamb, cut its throat. It was all messy kind of ordeal, right? They had to bring offerings and gifts and all, But what happened right as soon as they made that sacrifice, what did they do again? They sinned again. And so they were always incurring this debt that they could not repay. They were having to do it endlessly. And he's saying, no. All that is done. It's now through Jesus. You don't have to kill any more lambs. You don't have to kill any more goats. It's now through Jesus. And then he says, through him, everyone, that's a big word, everyone who believes. Now you don't have to be Jewish by blood. Now if you believe, you're in. Everyone who believes is set free from, look what it says, every sin. A justification that you were not able to obtain under the law of Moses. Every sin. They are free. They don't have to, if they believe, they don't have to sacrifice anymore. If they just believe that Jesus was the sacrifice, they're done with the whole thing. They're set free. And now all of our sins that we've ever committed in the past, they're all forgiven. All the sins that we're currently living in right now, they're forgiven. And all the sins in your future are what? Forgiven. Which makes you what? Perfect. Do you deserve that? No, you do not. I know, right? I don't either. But that's what he says. And think about somebody hearing that for the very first time. You've heard it 1,000 times. I'm trying to say it again. But you've heard this. It's not new to you. Put yourself in their shoes, hearing that for the first time. Well, what do you think the response is going to be? Big. And so they're so enamored by this that they said, hey, come back next Saturday. They had Sabbath was on Saturday. Come back next Saturday and talk about this. Guys, just a little aside. Tori, this isn't in my notes. Don't do that. Don't do that because of what happens in the story. They should have made a decision right there. They heard the message right there, and they didn't, and they said, come back and speak more to us. They had their shot. And some believed in that moment, but others wanted to wait. They wanted to wait and say, I want to hear more about it. I don't know. And here's what happened. The next Saturday came, and the text says almost the entire city showed up. Wouldn't that be crazy? And this is the hinge point right here. The entire city shows up, and the Jewish leaders that were there, all of a sudden, their mind switched, and they got jealous of Paul and Barnabas. And they said, we can't have this. And they switched in their mind, and they started trying to discredit them and drew up persecution for them in that moment. And in that moment, it says that some believed, but many came against them. Man, I wish those guys that would have accepted Christ right then. I think some of them are probably in hell now because they didn't take the opportunity that they had in the moment that they had it. And now we see a pattern that's going to exist. Paul, they kick him out of the region, and Paul does this thing. It's a very Jewish thing, but he shakes the dust off of his feet at them, which is a big deal. It's not like, if I could be crass, like flipping on the bird. It's not as rude as that, but it's a big deal. And he says, I'm done with you guys. He said, you guys, it's on your own head now. And that was a big deal because he had just separated himself from his own people. And he said, I'm going to be about the Gentiles now. Now, that doesn't mean that he would never try to reach the Jews again. He would. But his primary mission now, to the rest of his life, is going to be about reaching the Gentiles. And you and I said, praise the Lord, thank you, hallelujah, amen. Because unless you're tricking me, you're probably not Jews. You're part of that crowd that he set the domino effect into. So now in Acts chapter 14, Paul and Barnabas, they go to a city named Iconium. And in Iconium, a pattern begins to emerge where they preach, tons of people believe, but the ones who don't take it as heresy. And what do you do with heresy back in those days? You kill people for it. And so they would chase them around, they would stone them. They would try to stone them after church. Now, if there's a practice that I'm glad we're done with, it's stoning the preacher after the sermon. But Paul and Barnabas, they're able to flee to another city named Lystra. Lystra, okay? Now look in your Bibles at 14:8. Excuse me. 14:8, let's read all the way through 18. In Lystra, there was a man who was lame. It doesn't mean he was like not cool, okay? He couldn't walk, okay? He had been that way from birth, and he never walked. And he was listening to Paul as he was speaking, and Paul looks at him, and he saw that he had the faith to be healed. What does that mean? I'll never know. But he was tracking with Paul, I guess, and Paul sees, you have faith. And so he called out. He said, stand up on your feet. And after that, the man jumped up and began to walk. Pretty cool. When the crowd saw what Paul had done, they shouted in the Lycaonian language. So he doesn't understand this, I'm assuming, because he doesn't react to this till it's almost too late. The gods have come down to us in human form. Barnabas they called Zeus, and Paul they called Hermes because he was the chief speaker. The priest of Zeus, whose temple was just out the city, he brought bulls and wreaths to the city gates because he wanted the crowd to offer sacrifices to them. But when the apostles, Barnabas and Paul, heard of this, they tore their clothes. That was a Jewish practice where they would tear their clothes in grief. And they rushed out into the crowd shouting, hey, friends, why are you doing this? We are only human like you. We are bringing you good news, telling you to turn from these worthless things to the living God who made the heavens and the earth and the sea and everything in them. In the past, he let all the nations go their own way, yet he has not left himself without testimony. He's shown kindness by giving you rain from heaven and crops in their seasons and provides you with plenty of foods and fills your hearts with joy. But even with these words, he had difficulty keeping the crowds from sacrificing to them. Now, we're talking about getting knocked down in life. Now, this, I guess, would not be a sense of an example of getting knocked down, but oppositely, falsely lifted up. They're misunderstood in a bad way here. Now, they call them gods. I actually tried to make this happen in my own life when I was little. I'd say about I think it was 8 or 9. I was pretty young. But I was in the kitchen. It was a hot day in the summer, and I was getting ice water. And my sister my sister Lori was passing through the kitchen. And I don't know if I had been mulling on this and thinking about this, or if this just came into my mind all of a sudden. But I said, Lori, she said, what? And I said, you need to bow down and worship me. She said, what? I said, I'm God. And she had objections to that. And she said, how do I know that you're God? And I said, listen, you can't know that I am God, but you can't know that I'm not God. So just to be safe, you need to bow down right here and worship me as the Lord. Well, turns out she had a pretty effective way of testing my divinity. She went outside and she told Mom. Now, if you think that my mom came in and also bowed down and worshiped me, then you're going to be mistaken. She did not do that. In fact, she taught my sister that day that gods don't get spankings by their moms. So here's the conclusion of that. You can stop. Listen, I'm not God. When you sing, how great thou art, it's not me. First of all, my name's not Art, and second of all, I'm not God. So, but for Paul and Barnabas, they're so successful in their sermon that people think that they're a god, right? Now, it's important to understand, and here's what I want to say about this, that we all want to be successful, don't we? But I want to tell you something. Success brings a hidden danger. And we've got to watch out for it because it's a dangerous place to be. How many people have found God at rock bottom? Plenty of people. We have those stories, don't we? Or we know somebody that does. How many people have found God at the height of their success? I'm sure there's someone, but I don't know of anybody. It's a dangerous place to be. Because when you're successful, people are going to put you on the pedestal. And it's what you do in that moment that determines so much in your life. And if you're not careful, pride will creep in because it's easy to confuse what got you there. People will give you the credit, but you must determine what to do with that credit. Never hold it. Never hang on to it. Do you guys remember the Philly fan a couple of weeks ago when the baseball was hit and there was a rigmarole real quick to see who could get it first, and the guy just got it right before the girl did, and he excuse me, and he took it to his son whose birthday they were celebrating. He gave it to his son, and then the girl who just barely missed it, she was not done with the situation. She walked down there and she confronted him, and she said, "That's mine. That's mine. You took that from me." And he was like, "Whoa, what are you talking about? I just got it." And she said, No, that's mine. And so you know what he did with it? He took it and he just gave it to her, and he just got rid of it. Man, I want to tell us, Treat glory that way, because if we don't, this is what you'll become. That picture of that girl right there. Right? We become enamored with something that isn't ours. You know, it's interesting that this passage parallels Acts chapter 12. And King Herod, the guy who killed James, everybody starts praising his name. He says, the voice of God is in you. You're a God. And what does he do in that moment? He holds on to it, and he does not give it to God. And the text says that in that moment he died, that the angel of the Lord struck him down because he did not give the praise to God. And he fell down and worms ate him. Treat success like a loaded mousetrap. You know how you do? At least I do. You set that thing and you're just like, yeah. You know, be careful. You know, the two greatest confessions in the Bible, Ezel sent me this last week, and the two greatest confessions in the Bible, the first one was Peter's confession of Christ. Was whenever Jesus says, who do you say that I am? And he says, you are the Christ, the Son of the living God. That is the greatest confession that he made or that any of us will make. But the second greatest confession is right here. We are but men. We are not God. Don't steal the glory. Be faithful in success, because if you don't, you'll get knocked out. But look, in verse 19, it says this. In Acts 14:19, it says, then some Jews came from Antioch and Iconium and won the crowd over. And they stoned Paul and dragged him outside of the city, thinking he was dead. But after the disciples had gathered around him, he got up and he went back into the city. The next day, he and Barnabas left for Derbe. This is one of my favorite passages of all time in the Bible right here. Paul is wild for this. Why did he go back into the city after they just tried to kill him? Did he have a death wish? Well, no, because it says he left the next day. This is an act of faithfulness right here. That Paul, walking back into the city, he testified to the other disciples that the mission of Jesus is unstoppable. He will not be stopped, and fear would not rule them. It was a huge testimony to them. He was showing that the gospel is worth getting back up for. Listen, opposition people, they'll try to silence you. Failure in your life will shame you. Pain will tempt you to quit. But faithfulness means getting up every time you get knocked down. And Paul is faithful, not only with the credit, but now he's faithful in opposition. But it's not quite over. Look in verse 21. It says, they preached the gospel in that city and won a large number of disciples. Then they returned to Lystra, Iconium, and Antioch, the places where they were persecuted, right? Strengthening the disciples and encouraging them to remain true to the faith. And he says this, we must go through many hardships to enter the kingdom of God. If there's anybody with instant credibility to say that, it's Paul. We must go through many hardships to enter the kingdom of God. I love that Paul is faithful in encouragement too. You know, how you handle your pain is always, always, always a testimony to others. Why? Because what do we do when we see somebody going through a hard time? What do? We watch, don't we? We're interested in it. We naturally, maybe we shouldn't, but we do. And we look to see how they're going to handle that situation. It's interesting. Guys, how you handle your pain probably has more power than any of your words ever will. Your faithfulness, when you get knocked down and knocked out, speaks volumes to the people that you don't even know that are watching. Get up and be faithful. I don't know if you remember this, but the greatest boxing fight of all time happened on February 11th, 1990 in Tokyo, Japan. Mike Tyson was the undisputed heavyweight champion. He had a record of 37-0, and 33 of those were knockouts, right? He was known as the baddest man on the planet. Most opponents didn't even make it past the first few rounds. I mean, this guy was just a terror. Well, he was fighting a guy named James Buster Douglas, who was just a nobody. Nobody had him as even being able to stay in the fight. In fact, Vegas had him at 42-1 odds. I don't know if you know anything about sports betting, but that is astronomical odds. In fact, so astronomical that some of the casinos wouldn't even take the bet. He had no shot. In fact, the reason that the fight was in Tokyo was partly because it wasn't even considered worthy enough for a Vegas main event. But from the start, something was different. It was going differently than Tyson's other fights. Because Douglas wasn't afraid. And he fought, and he fought composed, and he fought hard, and everybody was shocked that he was able to stay in the fight, stay on his feet. But, and even by the middle rounds, Buster Douglas was outboxing Tyson himself. Everybody sat there in shock and awe. But this is Mike Tyson. And eventually, in the 8th round, he landed a bomb and knocked Buster down. Now, here's probably what nobody knew at the time. In the weeks leading up to the fight, Buster Douglas's mom had been she was so proud of her son that she had been telling everybody that would listen, my son is going to shock the world and beat Tyson. She would tell everybody, my son is going to shock the world and beat Tyson. In fact, she was telling it so much to everybody that even Buster Douglas said, hey, Mom, can you calm down with that? You're putting a lot of pressure on me here. You're making it hard, but eventually, she was saying it so much that he began to believe it. And it fueled him, and it gave him courage to even get into the fight in the first place. Whenever he got knocked down in the 8th round, he thought about his mom. His mom had just passed away right before the fight. Just a few weeks, 23 days before the fight, she died. Most people thought that he would bow out of the fight. But he didn't because of his mom's words. She said, my son is going to shock the world and beat Tyson. So he stayed in the fight and he fought for his mom. Well, now he's down. He's on the ground. And this is Tyson. And he has just gotten bombed. And when he was down, he thought about his mom. My son is going to shock the world and beat Tyson. And in that moment, he found the strength, and he got up, and he beat the count. And he got back in the fight even stronger. And he started fighting Tyson, punching him and frustrating Tyson. And nobody had ever pushed Tyson like this, so he didn't know what to do. And he got frustrated. He got desperate. And Douglas would not give up. And Douglas, in round 10, he unleashed a vicious combination, an uppercut, and then 4 punches right in a row. And boom, 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 boom. He knocked Tyson down for the very first time. Tyson had never been knocked down in his whole career. And he couldn't beat the count. And Buster Douglas had pulled off the greatest upset in boxing history. And he shocked the world. And he beat Mike Tyson. I just want to say this, guys. Life will knock us down. But the question is, will you get up? Will you stay faithful? And the text says this, be faithful when people praise you, because success can be as dangerous as failure. People may put you on a pedestal, but remember that the glory belongs to God. Never hold the glory. Be faithful in success, but also be faithful when people oppose you. Paul was stoned and dragged out of the city and left for dead, but he got up and he went back in on mission. You will get knocked down, but faithfulness means getting up. You are not defined by your knockdown. You are defined by your faithfulness in getting up. And be faithful when others need you. Because after his own hardship, Paul went back to the churches and encouraged them, we must go through many hardships to enter the kingdom of God. Your faithfulness doesn't just carry you. It doesn't just help you get up. It helps others. It strengthens others. Now, this church knows a thing or two about getting knocked down, don't we? Imagine a church full of people who, no matter what comes, success, opposition, or hardship, that we keep getting up and pointing to Jesus. That ripple effect is unstoppable. Let me pray.